Coming up on Network Africa, Nigeria to begin evacuation of citizens from Sudan using the Egyptian corridor. At least 60 civilians killed in the village of Kama in northern Burkina Faso. Plus, Kenya police exhumes at least 47 bodies from suspected Christian cult grave. A warm welcome to the program today. I'm Millicent Nwaka. Evacuations from the Sudanese capital have continued by various countries as fighting between the army and the paramilitary group, Rapid Support Group, RSF, shows no signs of abating. France, Germany, Canada, Spain, Italy, Netherlands, among others, have all said they've moved their diplomatic staff to safety. Here's more in this report.
The continuous battle raging in Sudan has forced several countries to begin evacuation operations to rescue foreign citizens, embassy or diplomatic staff by road and sea. The French government said France carried out evacuations of its citizens and other nationals of Sudan's war-torn capital of Khartoum as fighting between rival military factions continued in the African nation. The government says further evacuation efforts are continuing as 388 people have already been successfully evacuated from Sudan. France initially evacuated diplomats on Sunday as 8 days of battles between rival military factions that have triggered a humanitarian crisis showed little sign of let-up. The Dutch military released video of an overnight evacuation flight from Sudan. The flight from an airport near Khartoum had 32 evacuees on board. The Dutch Defense Ministry said they were first evacuated to Jordan and from there will be repatriated to the Netherlands. Meanwhile, 2 Italian Air Force planes have evacuated Italian citizens and other nationals from the Sudanese capital Khartoum. Italy's defense minister said the evacuation started over the weekend when 2 Italian military aircraft carrying special forces personnel arrived in the capital, where they boarded evacuees. Spain, on the other hand, evacuated its diplomatic personnel and citizens, as well as other EU and Latin American citizens from Sudan. The Spanish Defense Ministry said the evacuation was completed successfully as a military plane arrived in Djibouti for a stopover before flying to Madrid. A German Air Force plane with 101 people evacuated from Sudan has landed in Berlin. German military said it flew out 311 people so far from an airfield near Khartoum, and the first batch was brought back to Berlin aboard an Airbus A321 from the Al Azraq base in Jordan, which is being used as a hub for the evacuation operation. Jordanian citizens who were evacuated from Sudan have arrived safely in Makkah Airport in Amman. A statement by the Jordanian Foreign Ministry revealed 343 Jordanians, Palestinians, Iraqis, Syrians and Germans were evacuated from Port Sudan by 4 military planes. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says Canada has temporarily suspended operations in Sudan and extracted its diplomats. The armed forces of the United States and the United Kingdom have evacuated embassy staff from Sudan, while other nations rushed to get their citizens to safety. Meanwhile, British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says the country's armed forces evacuated diplomatic staff and their family members from Sudan. Sunak paid tribute to what he called a complex and rapid evacuation after he said there had been a significant escalation in violence and threats to embassy staff. Britain's Defence Minister Ben Wallace said British troops undertook the rescue operation alongside the United States, France and other unnamed allies. He adds that more than 1,200 military personnel were involved in organizing and carried out the rescue operation.
Last night, the British military conducted an evacuation operation of British diplomatic staff and the dependents from Khartoum, using elements of 16 Air Assault Brigade, the Royal Air Force and the Royal Marines. Over 1,200 people contributed to this operation. It was dangerous and precarious, but nevertheless we managed to use both C-130s and A400 aircraft to go in, collect our diplomats and their residents and fly out to safety. Obviously, we couldn't have done this without the support of the French and the United States, where in our joint planning we helped each other, and I think it's really important that we recognise that this has been an international effort.
Sudan's army said over the weekend it was helping to evacuate foreign nationals from the country via Port Sudan, which is 400 miles from Khartoum. As more evacuations continue, the fighting in Sudan has triggered a humanitarian crisis in the impoverished country, where millions of people have been left without access to basic services. According to the United Nations, more than 400 civilians have been killed and thousands others wounded.
We're staying with the evacuations. EU Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell says more than 1,000 European Union citizens were evacuated from Sudan over the weekend amid the deadly fighting between rival army factions. Mr. Borrell told journalists that it had been a complex operation but had been successful, adding that the EU ambassador to Khartoum was still in the country. He said that the EU bloc would continue pushing for a political settlement to end the crisis that could worsen and have an impact across the African continent.
It has been a complex operation and it has been a successful operation. First, the staff of the European Union, 21 people are already in Europe, and many more European Union citizens and others are already out of Sudan. I cannot give you the concrete figure, it's more than 1,000 people for sure. I want to thank France especially for taking our people out, and I want to thank the combined efforts of many countries that took their nationals, but also all nationals that they could pick. So it has been a successful operation, but complex. I was in touch with the two generals fighting in Sudan, and now the ceasefire is stopped, it's over. We have to continue pushing for a political settlement. We cannot afford that Sudan, which is a very populated country, implodes, because it will be sending shockwaves around the whole Africa.
Well, indeed, the evacuation of Nigerians stranded in Sudan may begin as early as tomorrow morning. That's according to the Director of Special Duties of the National Emergency Management Agency, NEMA. According to him, the Director General of NEMA, Mr. Mustafa Habib, is already in Cairo, the capital of Egypt, to perfect the movement. He was speaking on our breakfast program, Sunrise Daily.
The truth is, nobody has been evacuated yet. I just spoke to the ambassador Olaniyan in Khartoum some few minutes ago. It is true that there are plans to get buses to start movement tomorrow morning. And as I speak to you, the Director General, National Emergency Management Agency, Mustafa Habib, is already in Cairo, because that is the window that we are looking at. We have a town called Luxor and another one. So the movement is to be perfected between the embassy in Khartoum and the DG NEMA, who is already on ground in Cairo. When the situation started, it was not sensible for anybody to start any movement. And there was a total lockdown in that country. It's just a few days ago now that they got window. And this window they got, they still have to tread softly, because we don't know what the situation might be. Let me quickly remind you that even countries like France and Qatar tried to do some movement on Saturday. Because of the security situation, they had to beat a retreat back to Khartoum. So as much as we feel the pain of our citizens, we feel we should do it right so that we don't have casualty on our side. So that is where we are as of today. When you're doing consideration and evacuation, you have to do this evacuation considering security, and it has to be in a dignified manner. So the choice of Egypt should have come up because of the consideration of the people on ground here.
Well, sequel to that is the assurance coming from the chairperson of the Nigerians in Diaspora Commission, Mrs. Abike Dabiri Erewa, who says military, humanitarian arrangement and other logistics are in place to ensure the safe return of Nigerians trapped in Sudan. According to her, what the federal government is trying to achieve is that all students are evacuated in one piece. She said this earlier on our political program, Lunchtime Politics.
There's no point taking you from danger to another danger. And there were some people that were leaving that actually had to turn back because they would have been killed. So now they've returned to the various campuses, and the Nigerian mission has now communicated to them a point of connection where the buses will convey them to the most likely places will be some borders in Egypt. And from there, they will now be transported back home via some airlines. So that is the situation now. And I'm sure in a couple of hours, we hope to get them moving from that place. So the key thing here is that, yes, we need to ensure that they are safe. There's no point putting them in danger while moving. And you cannot move without the permission of the two sides of the military. And that the Nigerian mission has been able to secure. And then the buses have also been arranged and will take the students. And you know we have a large number of students. Our priority first are the students. So there's a list of the students with their institutions, with their phone numbers, and it runs into thousands, actually. Now, can I tell you something? If I say this, you think we have about 5 million Nigerians in Sudan. Half of the population of Sudan are Nigerians. And we've almost said it, it's just that this diaspora thing, every time you talk about UK, US, we have a lot of them on the African continent. And in Sudan, I'm telling you, they make up almost 5 million in the Sudan because a lot of them migrated and ended up staying there, and they are Nigerians. So the priority now are the students. The students have written their names with the missions, both in Khartoum, in Cairo, in Ethiopia. I've been working with the Students Association. So the first thing, let's get the students back. And then every other person that wants to come, there is the contact point, but we have to start. We're dealing with thousands. We have the largest numbers of students that need to be evacuated. Do you want us to take 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and just let one little plane? We can't do that. But the thing is, no matter when they leave, let them be safe, let them get out of there, let them reunite with their families. And the military is also on standby. Well, maybe Air Peace is on standby, the military is on standby, NEMA is on standby, but the key is getting them down safely, taking them to a location and transporting them back home.
Well, in the meantime, the United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, UNICEF, says the escalating violence in Sudan have taken a devastating toll on the country's children. Briefing reporters at the United Nations in Geneva, James Elder, UNICEF spokesperson, said there are reports of at least 9 children killed and 50 others injured. Before hostilities started in Sudan, humanitarian needs for children were higher than ever. 3/4 of children were estimated to live in extreme poverty, and 11.5 million children and community members needed emergency water and sanitation services.
We now have reports of at least 9 children killed, at least 50 have been injured. Those numbers will continue to rise as long as fighting continues. Really important to remember this fighting, as many of you will have seen, also means that you've just got large numbers of people trapped, so they haven't got access to electricity and they're terrified of running out of food, of water, of medicines. We've now got a situation where critical life-saving support for around 50,000 children is at risk. Now, severely acutely malnourished children. Now, if you can picture what that looks like, these children are in hospitals because they have the most severe cases. So they're being fed with tubes because that's literally the only way they can be fed. And when the bombing begins or the shelling begins outside a hospital, and when medical staff need to flee, then what? Humanitarian assistance is critical. Now, UNICEF and our partners, we can't provide that support when the safety and security of staff is not guaranteed. As the UN Secretary General has been saying, for a week, we need forces to immediately cease hostilities, for all parties to respect their international obligations to keep children safe from harm.
Well, still to come on the program, we have more on the Sudan crisis as VOA's Africa regional correspondent, Mariama Diallo, joins me. Also, artists give new life to Ivory Coast neglected pyramid. We have details in a moment. Welcome back. The South African government has joined other countries whose citizens are stranded in the conflict-stricken Sudan country in calling for a ceasefire and the repatriation of its citizens as violence erupted a week ago following a breakdown in negotiations on political and security sector reforms. There are 77 South Africans stranded in Khartoum, according to Clayton Monyela, the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, head of public diplomacy. Evacuating South Africans and other nationals from neighboring countries in SADC is their number one priority. Some European countries have already evacuated their citizens, as we have reported. President Cyril Ramaphosa is weighing in on this and says the situation in Sudan is concerning and unnecessary. So far, 413 people have died.
The situation in the Sudan is most concerning, and in our view, it's a most unnecessary conflict that is underway. And we have called for a ceasefire, an immediate ceasefire, so that that conflict is brought to an end. And it should be subjected to negotiations. And we would be looking to IGAD to give the lead in this matter so that IGAD, together with the AU, should immediately, as they are, be seized with this matter to ensure the safety of life, to ensure that there's a ceasefire and an immediate process of negotiations. It's clearly and truly not necessary for two armed forces in one country to be engaging in a conflict that could soon grow to be a civil war that could engulf the entire country. That should be avoided. And if there is a place where the guns must be silenced, it is in the Sudan right now.
President of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa. Well, joining me now is VOA's Africa regional correspondent, Mariama Diallo. She joins me from Nairobi. Hi, Mariama. It's good to see you. It's a dire situation there in Sudan. Several countries are intensifying efforts to evacuate their diplomats and citizens. What else do we know?
Well, as you mentioned in the beginning of the show, basically the U.S. government personnel, for example, who were evacuated over the weekend, some of them are slated to arrive in Washington this afternoon. And it's not just the United States. As we know, we've had other countries such as Canada, Egypt, France, Germany, Sweden, among other countries that are evacuating their citizens, their diplomatic citizens. I think some of them are also trying to just evacuate, their regular citizens. But at this point, we're not sure which countries are doing just diplomatic and which countries are doing diplomatic and combining it with just regular citizens. For example, the United States has about 16,000 other Americans who live in Sudan. So the U.S. is talking about the fact that they're not planning to have a large-scale kind of evacuation, but they are following the situation, obviously, and they'll do whatever they can to help their citizens. And it's the same for every country right now. Your country, Nigeria, just mentioned, is going to be evacuating some students tomorrow. Kenya, where I am, has also been trying to do the same thing, has started. So at this point, I think for the U.S., the only thing I want to mention is that I think a lot of the questions are how are they getting these people out? I think for the U.S. in particular, they said they evacuated the diplomatic staff from the embassy using helicopters from Djibouti, and then they refueled in Ethiopia and now on their way to Washington.
Indeed. So, this is happening, and many wonder, if there are sort of free of obstructions because heavy fighting is still continuing in some of these areas. But to you, do you think there were any specific threats to the diplomats directed towards them? This is the rapid evacuations of most of the diplomatic staff from the different countries. Was there anything specific?
Well, I think in Sudan, it's very, very hard to verify what information is right, because information keeps changing all the time. But I think the fact that all these countries are going full force and trying to evacuate their diplomatic staff, it's an indication that, listen, this is not safe. We can't guarantee your safety. Or maybe they are going through threats. I think that's what I can, the feeling that I have. But it's hard to kind of verify the information. All you can see, we see it. I mean, if you have France, you have, Nigeria, Kenya, the Italians, the Swedish, the US, and they're all, what you also can notice is that they've all been on the phone trying to talk to these two generals, basically begging them for just a little bit of a window so they can evacuate their staff. So I think the threat is there, even if they don't say it, but it shows that it's there, because they could have bought, if it wasn't that imminent, they could have said, okay, well, let's wait another week, let's wait a few days. But it looks like they're not wasting any time. And that's all countries, anybody who can do something.
I must ask before we let you go, is there any hope for a ceasefire?
Well, I think that is the million-dollar question, because from the beginning, I think the UN started asking for a few hours of ceasefire. It didn't work. You had the IGAD meeting, the emergency summit that took place the weekend right after the war started, and asked for a ceasefire. That didn't work. Even I think IGAD is still working to kind of get those three presidents, the Kenya, Djibouti, and South Sudan, in Khartoum to negotiate. But the problem, as you can see, the airport is a place of heavy fighting, and so they can't just kind of be parachuted in Khartoum. Something has to happen. Talk about ceasefires. I think the Kenyan foreign minister is actually meeting with the U.S. Secretary of State today. And I think Sudan was going to be a huge part of their talk. And we are going to find out actually what happens to that. I think there is maybe hope, but at this point, I think the 72-hour ceasefire that was brokered, I'm going to always go like this for the for the ceasefires, just kind of trying to take advantage of the Eid celebrations to say, okay, let's hold off. But if that didn't hold off, I don't know at this point. I think everybody is working behind the scenes, whether it's the Arab League, the African Union, IGAD, the United States, the European Union. I think everybody is working and doing their best. But at this point, I think the lack of trust maybe between the two generals, between Al-Burhan and Hemedti, is just taking over so much that they can't even just say, let's have, like a full day of ceasefire.
Well, so will we. We'll continue to watch the developments. Many thanks, Mariama Diallo, is VOA's Africa Regional Correspondent. Thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Now, staying in Africa, about 60 civilians have been killed in a village in northern Burkina Faso. That's according to the local prosecutor, who announced an investigation into the attacks. Citing information from police in the town of Wahiguya, Prosecutor Lamine Kabore said the attack took place in the village of Kama near the border with Mali. The statement said the perpetrators were wearing the uniforms of Burkinabe armed forces, but gave no further details on the attack. He said the wounded have been evacuated and are currently being taken care of within health facilities, adding that the perpetrators had taken various goods. In Kama, survivors said more than 100 people on motorbikes and pickup trucks had raided the village, and dozens of men and young people were killed by men dressed in military uniforms. Over in Kenya, at least 58 bodies have been exhumed in southeastern region of the country as part of an investigation into a suspected Christian cult. Kenyan police began exhuming remains from more than a dozen suspected graves in the east of the country, thought to contain followers of a Christian cult who believe they would go to heaven if they starved themselves to death. And finally on the program, international and local artists paint giant, colourful murals on the exterior of a 15-story building in Ivory Coast commercial capital called the Pyramid, an architectural gem that fell into disuse 20 years ago. They aim to give the neglected tower a new look. Take a look.
Ivorian artists are embarking on a rehabilitation project to give new life to Ivory Coast Pyramid. A symbol of Ivorian prosperity in the 1970s and one of the first towers built in the central business district of Plateau in Abidjan. This futuristic pyramid-shaped building was neglected for years. The project, Pyramid 2023, Tomorrow is Already Born, aims to give it a second life. Through this initiative, Ivorian artistic director Lemon Otto renovates external facades of older buildings like the Pyramid, which was completed in 1973 under the direction of the Italian architect Rinaldo Olivieri.
We are all here to work together. In a way, that was the main objective.
Minister of Construction and Urbanism Bruno Nabagne-Kohn says that the renovation must respect the original architecture of the building since the current structure is in good condition. Architects say many buildings in the business district are internationally known and could teach Ivorians about their own urban history.
And that's it on Network Africa. Thank you for watching. I'm Millicent Wall.